recruitment. We're going to get through all the presentations, and then we'll go into questions. So when we get to questions, I just kind of ask if you want to drop them in the chat. We'll kind of take them in order as they come in the chat. If you want to unmute, we can set up a situation that you guys are unmuting. We'll ask your question, and then we'll kind of go to the next row. But just kind of everybody kind of helping us stay orderly. We're going to appreciate the heck out of it, and we hope you find this useful.
All right, thanks, Nick. And so now it looks like we have 51 people online already, so that's great. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Sorensen, and he's going to give the first presentation on the Francis Case Fishery.
All right. Thanks, Nick and Chris. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen here. Yeah. Is it working?
Yep, you're coming up, Jason. Just taking a little bit.
Taking a little bit. As Chris said, we're going to share with you some information from our survey, some of our surveys that we do on Lake Francis Case. And
we're still getting you to come up, Jason. There you go.
There
we are.
Okay. So can everyone see that? All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to start out with just a little bit of information about the reservoir and Fort Randall Dam itself, and then move into information about how the survey is designed and how it's set up. And so you kind of know what it is we do to gather this information. And then we're going to look at some of the information we get from this netting survey and look at some trends in the walleye population over time. And after that, we'll talk a little bit about some angler use and harvest data that we collect throughout the summer. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the Lake Francis Case paddlefish population and give everybody a short update on that. And then we'll turn it over to Amy after that. So just to start out with, as most of you are probably aware of, maybe some aren't, Lake Francis Case is a main stem Missouri River impoundment that's backed up by Fort Randall Dam, which is located near Pickstown, South Dakota. The construction of the dam started in 1946 and ended in 1952. It took until about late November of 1953 for the reservoir to fill to the minimum operating pool. And that's when they started, flowing water through the powerhouse and generating electricity and so on and so forth. Lake Francis Case, while it's pretty sizable, it's the 11th largest reservoir in the United States. It's the 4th largest reservoir on the Missouri River main stem system. It's about 107 miles long, has about 540 miles of shoreline, covers about 102,000 surface acres when it's at the base of flood control, which is about 1,350 feet above sea level per elevation. Has a max depth about 40 feet. Has a storage capacity of a little over 5.4 million acre feet, which a million acre foot of water is enough water to cover 1 acre, 1 foot deep. The record flows through the powerhouse and spillway system, of course, occurred in 2011. If you all remember, there was significant water inflow into the basin that year. And the record flow was at 160,000 CFS. That included the powerhouse and the spillway, which a lot of people thought was pretty close to maxing out the capacity of the system. But in reality, Fort Randall Dam was designed to release upwards of 805,000 cubic feet per second. So while it was a lot of water in 2011, the structure itself can handle quite a bit more than that if it needed to. But those are just some fun facts and a little information about the reservoir itself in case someone wasn't aware of it. So from that, we're going to move on to talk a little bit about our survey design. This information we're sharing tonight, a lot of it comes from our gill netting survey. We conduct our our gill netting survey on Francis Case in September. And it covers the entire reservoir, all the way from Fort Randall Dam up to Big Bend Dam. Prior to 2017, we used a different style of net. They were 300 feet multi-filament gill nets. And we'll get into that a little later. But starting in 2017, we switched gill net, the survey design to a different type of gill net, essentially to try to provide some consistency across the state as to how we did our gill net surveys on a statewide basis. And so from 2017 until current, we use 80-foot long monofilament nets. And so the two different netting methods are not comparable. So it's important that we keep them separate. And so I'll kind of point to that here in a little bit. But we have 75 randomly selected net sites up and down the reservoir. And the nets are 6 foot tall and they sit on the bottom of the lake overnight. And we put them anywhere from 8 foot of water up to 99 feet of water. We exclude water that's over 100 foot deep. And of course, as anybody that fishes Francis Case a lot knows, there's a lot of timber in the water. And so if one of the netting locations is on a forest, we will move that net to the edge of the forest and set it there. So this, just a little bit to start out, is a pie chart that shows just what our species composition is from our 2024 gill net sample. And as you can see, walleyes are right here, WAE. They accounted for just about 21% of our sample. This is all the fish we caught in the gill nets in 2024. Catfish channel catfish here accounted for 22%, and so on and so forth. There's common carp, sauger, freshwater drum, yellow perch, gizzard shad, goldeye, smallmouth bass, white bass, and then other. The other category consists of a whole host of different species, but it's pretty common that on Francis Case, we do see similar numbers of walleye and channel catfish in the gill nets, and that's typically what dominates our catch year in and year out. So this is pretty typical, a pretty typical year. This chart here on the x-axis has the years, 1999 to 2016. On the y-axis is the number of walleyes per net, or our catch per unit effort. And we use that as an index to relative abundance in the population. And this is what I was talking about. These are the old style nets that were 300 feet long, multi-filament. And this red line here is runoff into the Missouri River system above Sioux City. The bars in the graph are broken down by size of the walleye, with the white being the age 0 fish, the yellow being those less than 15 inches, the blue is 15 to 20 inches, and the green bars are those fish over 20 inches. And what you can notice here is that when we have high water yield in the basin, our walleye population responds to that, and typically we see an increase in abundance. Those years back here in the early 2000s, when we were in a drought cycle, we saw a decrease in our walleye abundance. And then with the big flows we had in 2010 and 2011, we saw those fish respond to that. And also keep in mind, typically when you see high runoff into the basin, that means high localized runoff into the reservoir itself. Francis Case really thrives on localized runoff. Water coming down, the White River, Platte Creek, Peace Creek, all the little creeks that flow in Whetstone Creek. That's what really brings the nutrients into the system and drives our fish production. So that's important. The water coming from the mountains typically is pretty sterile water by the time it gets to us and after it's been through 4 reservoirs. So the nutrients really come locally, but like I said, when we see high runoff in the basin from the mountains, it typically also means we've had pretty good localized runoff. Now this chart here is pretty much the same as the last one. The years on the bottom are catch per unit effort of walleye on the y-axis, and with the same categories of size fish and the runoff into the system being the red line. This is our new nets that we switched to starting in 2017 and until currently. And one thing that you'll notice is the last couple of years, 23 and 24, we've been a little bit below average in terms of our overall numbers of walleye in the reservoir. But what we do see here, you look at this blue on 2024, those are the fish in our sample this last year that were 15 to 20 inches. You can see, and then the green is the fish over 20 inches again. You can see that the numbers of fish we had that are of harvestable size is very similar to what we've seen almost every year, except for 2020 being an outlier there. So really the number of harvestable size fish out there is looking pretty good, or very similar to what we have seen over time. We didn't see as many smaller fish. There are times where these nets don't sample the small fish effectively, so sometimes we wonder if this is really indicative of what we're seeing, but as those fish grow to older ages and larger sizes, they should show up in our net catches. If they don't, then we know that they're maybe not out there. Screen's locked up.
Maybe turn that pointer off.
Yeah.
And then try advancing and then.
Okay. There we go.
This is all part of the
Okay.
learning.
Yeah, technical difficulties. Nick was supposed to fix that. Okay, so because we don't sample the really small fish effectively with our gill nets, we do an electrofishing survey in the fall to sample our age 0 fish. Age 0 walleyes are those fish that hatch that year. So in 2024, when these fish would have hatched in May of 2024, and they're considered age 0 until the end of the year when they turn age 1. So this again is the years 2008 through 2024 on the x-axis, and the number of walleye per hour of electrofishing on the y-axis. And then the red line is just the average over time. You can see the last few years, our age 0 fish production, we've had above average catches in our fall samples. One nice thing on Lake Francis case is we always see some level of fish production or walleye production. I don't remember a year where we ever had a 0 in terms of walleye production. And so it's very consistent for that, and the recruitment to the adult population is consistent. And so we typically don't have issues. Now we do have, as you can see here, years that are stronger year classes than others. And that probably is because of runoff into the system and nutrient inflow and so on and so forth. There's a whole host of things that can determine whether it's a strong or weak year class of walleyes produced. But by and large, we see fish production on case every year. This graph here shows the length distribution of our walleyes in our 2024 gill net sample. And I'm gonna turn my laser back on. All right. This is fish length along the bottom and number of walleyes per net in each length category is what this chart is showing. I highlighted the 2 yellow bars. It's 15 and 20 inches. And so those fish there are the ones that are between 15 and 20 inches. And what we saw in our sample is that 58% of the walleyes in our catch are of harvestable size to anglers. And this survey takes place in September, and so it kind of gives us an indication of what's available to the anglers the following year. So there's really good sized fish in the population right now. This chart here is what we call relative weight, again, 2008 to 2024. And this is the relative weight index. And basically it indicates how skinny or how plump or fat a fish is. And typically we want to see that value above 80. Now in Lake Francis case, by and large, most years, we're seeing relative weight values in the low to mid 80s. Now there's some years, including 2024, where we see that really bump up. 2010, 2016, 2019, and 2024. The value for 2024 was 90, which is very good condition, especially on Francis case. It's quite a bit higher than what we typically see. And some things that may have contributed to that, the winter of 23 to 24 was very mild. And the primary forage species in Lake Francis case is gizzard shad. And so being on the northern edge of shad range, they don't tolerate cold water real well. And if we have more than 100 days of ice cover, we typically lose a lot of the H0 gizzard shad in the reservoir. The winter of 23 and 20 to 24 was really mild winter, and we didn't have that ice cover for prolonged periods. And we didn't see a big shad die off like we typically do, which resulted in a lot of those shad being available for those fish to eat the following spring, and probably was a driving factor in the relative weights of these fish shooting up like that. One thing to note, when a fish is fat and happy, he doesn't have to eat. But so it's a lot of competition out there for your bait. Plus we had a good year class of shad produced this last summer. And so not only did we have leftover shad from the previous year, we had a lot of shad produced in 2024 as well. This chart here, it shows our walleye from our sample, and this is ages along the bottom, ages 1 through 9, and the length of the fish. And this shows how fast these fish are growing. I put the 15-inch and 18-inch mark in here as reference for you. And typically in South Dakota, or at least on Francis case, we'd like our walleyes to reach 15 inches by about age 3. Well, if you follow this growth, and I should back up, this red or brown line, whatever color that is the 2024 information, and the blue line is the average over time. And so we can see our fish are pretty much growing about on average, but and like I said, we'd like them to reach about 15 inches by age 3, when in reality, they're actually a little bit over 16 inches by age 3. So these fish are eating well, they're fat and happy, and they're growing very well. We're pleased with what we're seeing there. Now to move on to some angler use information. This is, again, the years 1995 to 2024, and the fishing use in hours. And while it goes up and down, and you can see some dips, like 1997, a lot of boat ramps were underwater. We saw use drop. Same with 2011. And then in 2020, COVID, of course, we didn't have a survey. But what you can see here is that the last 3 years, 21 or 22, 23, 24, fishing use has been pretty much the same. It's actually slightly gone up each year, but overall pretty much been the same for the last few years. And anglers, we estimate they spent 437,000 hours fishing Lake Francis case in 2024. That's a little bit less than the average, but some of these higher years are really driving that average up. And it kind of follows the walleye abundance and the runoff, and, you know, we get good conditions, we get a lot of fish, people come fishing, and then as we don't have the water yield in the system, we don't get as many fish in the reservoir, people don't fish as much, and so it kind of follows the same pattern as some of the other stuff. Now this here is the walleye catch rates. So this is, again, on the x-axis, the years, 95 through 2024. And on the y-axis, it's the walleye caught per hour of fishing. And we term it a catch rate. And so you can see in 2024, walleye catch rates were right at about half a fish an hour, which means, so on average, anglers fished for about 2 hours to catch a walleye. Of course, that's a lot lower than what we typically see on Lake Francis case. We've seen similar catch rates, you know, back in 2016, 2010, in the past, but it's not typical. Typically, we have a shad die off. We see high catch rates in the spring and early summer, and as the shad reproduce and the young shad grow to desirable sizes, the walleyes key in on those. But why we saw such low catch rates in 2024 probably was a combination of a lot of different things. Like I said already, the shad numbers, we didn't see the shad die off. And so these fish were eating from the very beginning all the way through summer, and really didn't need to eat a lot of other things because they had a lot of food available to them. The other thing we've seen and noticed is zebra mussels have really started to clear the reservoir up, and we're starting to see fish maybe inhabiting some different areas of the reservoir that they haven't traditionally been in at certain times of the year because of the clean, clear water. We've had a lot of anglers tell us that they've had really good fishing this last year, but they couldn't catch fish in the areas and the ways that they traditionally had. They had to try some different things and search around a little bit to figure out where the fish had moved to. Another thing we're seeing is vegetation growing in areas of the reservoir where we have never seen vegetation grow before. And that's probably due to the clearer water with the sunlight penetrating deeper, and we're getting some vegetation growing at deeper depths. And when it gets into those deeper depths, it's not as susceptible to wave action to get wiped out. And I'm sure there's bait fish and as well as game fish utilizing those areas. But when we started to see this and started to think about it and put it together, we looked into that correlation between walleye catch rates and relative weights. And we noticed that by and large, there is a pretty good correlation that when angler catch rates are low, relative weights are fairly high. And this again is catch rates along the x-axis and walleye condition, or that relative weight that we typically like to see between 80, or that we see between 80 and 85 on Francis case. When we have years with these higher relative weight values, we see lower catch rates, which really makes sense. I just put this correlation coefficient in here, just it's a 0.519. So really this explains about 52% of the time why these or how these relative weights are affecting catch rates. So if we look at walleye harvest, and of course walleye harvest is totally a result of catch rates and angling use. We have the number of walleye kept over here in the years along the bottom again. You can see we had pretty low harvest in 2024. We estimated that anglers harvested, let's see, about 67,543 walleyes in 2023, which is what you can see here is pretty much well below the average. when you have lower catch rates, you're gonna have lower harvest. It's not out of line with what we've seen in some of these other years back here in 2005, 8, 9, 11, or 7 and 8, sorry. But still below our average. With that, I'm gonna move on and talk a little bit about the Lake Francis Case paddlefish season, just give you a brief update on that. I don't know if everyone is aware, paddlefish in the Missouri River, after they impounded the reservoirs, there was some significant snag fisheries below the powerhouses at these dams. And these fish quickly started to get reduced in abundance by anglers, as they were concentrated and they were easy for anglers to target. And as a result, in 1986, snagging below Big Bend Dam was closed. But prior to that, Game Fish and Parks, in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, had started a stocking program in the Lake Francis Case to try to keep the paddlefish abundance in the reservoir up. They started stocking in 1974, I believe, and these were sporadic stockings of paddlefish fry and small fingerlings. Excuse me. And when they got to about 1990, 1991, they realized if they stocked a larger product, they could avoid predation by predator fish. And so they started stocking larger fingerlings in 1991, and they stocked them annually since then. I believe there was just 1 year that wasn't stocked due to Asian clams being discovered at Gavin's Point Fish Hatchery. And so we didn't stock that year, so we didn't spread those around. Part of the stocking program, from the get-go, one goal was to reinitiate a sport fishery. And in 2012, we had the information that told us that we could support a snag fishery in Lake Francis Case again. And so in 2012, the first paddlefish fishery since 1986 was opened up again. The state of South Dakota issued 350 resident-only permits, and the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe and the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe each issued 25 permits for a total of 400 permits. Now that went on until about 2019, we added archery as a method of take. And so now the anglers could decide, do they want to snag for their fish or try to stick one with a bow? And I think we've had some people trying archery. I haven't heard of anybody actually being successful with it yet out there, but I think there's been some people trying it. And then starting this last year in 2024, we upped the number of tags because we started very conservatively with the harvest numbers, not knowing what success would be like and how it would go. And so we got to the point where we realized we could probably up the number of tags, and give a few more people the opportunity to partake in this special fishery. It is a high demand fishery, and you'll see that here in a minute. But starting in 2024, we started issuing 500 resident only tags. And the Lower Brule and Crow Creek Sioux tribes each issue 50 tags. Now there's a total of 600 permits. This chart simply shows from 2012 to 2024, the number of applicants that we have for those, what was 350 permits and is now 500 permits. In 2024, we had just over 1,900 applicants for those 500 permits, which is pretty similar number of applicants to other years, but remember the other years had fewer permits available, but average just under 1,900 applicants each year. Now, the paddlefish anglers in 2024, and this is the catch rates again, the number of fish caught per hour over time on the bottom, 2012 to 2024. Paddlefish anglers, just like the walleye anglers, experienced lower catch rates in 2024. 0.1 paddlefish per hour in 2024. That's about half of what the average catch rate is over time. If you remember back, the season is in May, and if you remember back to May of 24, it was a pretty cold spring. And we didn't see the water warming up as fast as it typically does, and these fish weren't quite moved into areas where the anglers target them as abundantly as they normally would have at that time of year. But as the water warmed up, things got a little better later in the month. And people were able to catch some fish, but again, it was a little slower than average, just like the walleye catch rates. These charts simply show the estimated number of fish released in the pink and harvested in the blue. And the 2024 harvest estimate was 166 fish, which is a little bit below the overall average, but still not too bad. And the number of fish released was also quite a bit less than average, but I don't know, for whatever reason, our anglers aren't catching and releasing as many fish as they used to the first 7 or 8 years of the season. It could be weather related, could be anything. There's a lot of different factors that play into that. So I guess to sum things up, on Francis' case, we actually saw an increase in our walleye abundance in our gill net samples over 2023, even though both years they are below the long-term average. The walleyes that are in the population are really, they're a harvestable size, almost, 58% of them are over 15 inches. And we're still seeing excellent growth and great condition on these fish. They're fat and they're happy and they're eating well. Of course, below average angling use and below average catch rates is what we experienced in 2024, possibly caused by all those things I mentioned, the gizzard shad abundance, as well as the weather playing a factor in that, and zebra mussels cleaning the water up and vegetation growing. These fish are just moving around a little bit and using different areas of the reservoir that they don't typically use. So those folks that say, well, we catch them here every year, it may not be the case. You might have to mix up your techniques or your locations a little bit and find where these fish are hanging out. But then of course with the paddlefish, it remains a high demand for the permits that are available. And again, we saw lower catch rates in 2024, but overall similar harvest to the previous year. And so with that, that's all I had for Francis' case. So I will turn this over to Amy to visit with you about Lewis and Clark Lake. And we'll go from there and we'll have time for questions at the end.
Jason, do I just show it like a normal?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will first start out a little bit with background before talking about the Lewis and Clark data. I'm just gonna get my pointer going. How'd you do that, Jason?
Can everyone hear Amy?
Everybody's sleeping.
You got a thumbs up there.
Thumbs up.
Okay. Okay,
Alan
so,
says it's good, Amy. You can go on.
oh, okay. So, Lewis and Clark starts up here at Pickstown, right below Fort Randall Dam. And it goes down to Gavin's Point Dam, on the right of this red circle. And it makes up about 69 river mile. Lewis and Clark is a little bit different than Francis Case in the aspect that it has a pretty good riverine stretch right here, a delta area, and then it has some portion of Lewis and Clark that acts more like a true reservoir. It has a surface acreage of just over 19,000 and a max depth of about 45 feet that you can find near the dam. Like Jason said, in 2017, we started using a standardized experimental gill net that's about 80 feet long. And in Lewis and Clark, we set 36 randomly placed gill nets, specifically in the lake portion of this reservoir, due to the fact that the delta area and the riverine reach are not very conducive to setting those types of gill nets. So moving on and talking about the species composition that we catch through time in our gill nets. This figure is showing years on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is an abundance index. There's a few things I'd like to point out. One thing is the majority of our catch is made up by channel catfish, usually in blue, freshwater drum in orange, and gizzard shad in gray. However, the purple is a walleye that makes up 8% of our catch in 24, and Sauger made up an additional 8% of our catch in 24. And this is very similar to what we see most years of the walleye and Sauger contribution to our catch out of our gill nets. Again, just like Francis' case, these gill nets on Lewis and Clark are set in September. So moving on and specifically talking about walleye abundance. So Jason was talking about how Francis' case really, their walleye abundance really benefits from high water yield years. And that is actually the inverse what happens with what we're seeing with our walleye abundance when we have high water yield years. And that's just due to the fact that when water enters into Lewis and Clark, it does not stay in Lewis and Clark very long. And so the lake really doesn't use that nutrients as efficiently, or it is not able to use that nutrients like Francis' case is. And so this is our historical data before our new gill nets, our standardized gill nets. And you can see that in the early 2000s, that our walleye abundance appears to be quite high, and our water yield is quite low. And I'll go back because I sort of rushed into that. So we have years on the x-axis and abundance index on the right axis, or on the left y-axis, excuse me, and runoff or water yield on the right y-axis. Water yield is being shown in red, and orange is the average water yield across all years. These bars are designated by lengths, with white being age 0 individuals, yellow being 15 or less inches long, blue being 15 to 20 inches, and green being 20 inches. And so I'll point out again, after I described it, that in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we had low water yield years, and we had some higher walleye relative abundance. Now, we haven't built that data set up yet with our new gill nets. However, it appears that this similar trend is occurring in these is occurring with our walleye abundance in comparison with our water yield, where we see the first 5 years of using the standardized gill nets, we had higher water yield years, and we have had lower walleye abundance. These last 3 years, we have had some lower water yield years, and we have had higher walleye abundance. I'd also like to point out that in 2024, we have had the vast majority of our walleye are 15 inches or higher, indicated right here. And that's just a good thing, because those are fish that are legally available for fishermen to keep and catch. Now moving on and looking and talking about walleye growth. Now, as fish biologists, we like to look at growth because we want to make sure that our fish are growing and they're staying growing throughout as they age. So in this figure, you have age on the x-axis and on the y-axis is length in inches. And the red dashed line is the 15-inch minimum length limit. The gray line is the average over the last 10 years, mean length at age. And then the blue line is what we saw this year. And so when I say mean length at age, that is talking about the average age, or the average, excuse me, length of a specific age. And how we do this is we pull otoliths, which are the picture on the top right, which are ear stones in a fish, and we can count the rings on these otoliths. And so the main things I would like to point out here is that Lewis and Clark is really known for having quite fast growing fish. And you can see that at age 2, fish are already at that 15 inches on average. And I'd like to remind you, these fish were taken in September. Age 3 walleyes are about 17.5 inches. And you can see as the fish are getting older that they are continuing to still grow. So now moving on and looking at age structure, excuse me. Our gill nets do not adequately sample age 0 and age 1 individuals just due to the mesh size is not really ideal for those smaller individuals. And we find that in Lewis and Clark, age 2 and older individuals are adequately caught. And you can see that the vast majority of walleye caught are between the ages of 2 and 3. And we also see that there is this natural stair-stepping effect that is very indicative of a normal walleye population. Later on, I will talk to you guys about age 0 walleye that we use as an indicator instead of our age 0 out of our gill nets. So moving on and talking about condition, like Jason said, is really just looking at how healthy in the sense of, are these individuals, you know, skinny, or are they quite plump? And in Lewis and Clark, we like to see that condition above 80. Now, over the years, we've seen it really bounce between about 83 to 95. And so staying well within the range we would like to see. In the last 2 years, we were about 84 and 85. So going back and talking about those age 0 individuals, there is a lot going on in this figure. And so I'm just going to start by describing it. Year is on the x-axis with the asterisks on those years indicating the years that Lewis and Clark was stocked with young of the year walleye. On the left y-axis, we have age 0 walleye per hour of electrofishing. And on the right y-axis, we have water yield or runoff in million acre feet. Now, just like our gill nets with our larger walleye individuals, we see this inverse relationship with water yield and walleye abundance with our age 0s, in which when you have these high water yield years, we are seeing lower walleye abundance of those age 0s. I would also like to point out that 2024, we did not stock, and this was due to the prediction that water yield was going to be lower than average, as well as snowpack was going to be less than average. And so we did not stock. Also, 2024 was the highest catch per unit effort or abundance of walleye per hour that we've caught since we have electrofished for young of the year walleye consistently since 2008. Moving on and talking about Sauger abundance. Again, you see that red line running through this figure. And that indicates that this same relationship as we see with walleye, being abundant when low water years, we also see with Sauger. So years are on the x-axis, the left Y is an abundance index, and then the right Y is runoff in million acre feet. And you can see in the late 2000 teens that we have high water yield years and lower walleye, or Sauger abundance, excuse me. And in the early 2020s, we have had lower water yield years and higher abundance. I'd also like to point out, since we've started using the more standardized gill nets, 2024 was the highest Sauger abundance we have collected. And again, just like walleyes, the bars are colored the exact same, with age 0 being white, less than 15 inches being yellow, 15 to 20 being blue, and 20 being over 20, excuse me, being green. And almost half of the Sauger individuals we caught in our gill nets were over that 15 inches, so above that minimum length limit. And again, these fish were caught in September. So now looking at the growth curve on the left side for Sauger, age is on the x-axis, length is on the y-axis in inches. And just like walleye, Sauger in Lewis and Clark is very good. At about age 2, half of those age 2 individuals are about 15 inches in length. However, they are a little bit slower than walleye age 3. Walleye was about 15 and a half, or 17 and a half, excuse me. And Sauger reaches on average about 16 inches at age 3. So still very impressive, but slightly slower than walleye. And moving to the right figure, we have age on the x-axis and number per sample on the y-axis. And again, for Sauger, we're not really catching those age 0 and age 1s effectively with gill nets, but age 2 individuals and older are adequately being sampled. And you can see the vast majority of our sample was made up of age 2 individuals. Now, Jason and I have both hinted at that the old nets and the new nets are not comparable. And in this figure, looking at catfish data, I did put them together. However, that is due to the fact that I want you guys to see that the channel catfish have had consistent, channel catfish has been consistently abundant in Lewis and Clark Lake, other than 2011 and 2019, when there was extreme high water years. And these low abundances of channel catfish are most likely caused by the high water and the gill nets not adequately being able to sample them properly, or adequately, I should say. Looking at the length categories of channel catfish, this is through time, obviously, with years on the x-axis, number per net on the y-axis. I'd like to point out that in 24, so we had very few individuals 11 inches or shorter. Those are light blue. 11 to 16 inches is yellow. 16 to 24 is that orangey red color, and above 24 inches is that dark blue. And in 2024, we have a large abundance of very nice sized fish for anglers to catch. Moving on and talking about smallmouth bass. Now, I'd like to point out right off that the Randall Reach is shocked in the fall, and the Lewis and Clark Lake fish are shocked in the spring. And so that is one of the reasons there is some different colors being represented here. So looking on the left side with the Randall Reach, you can see years are on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, you have number per hour. And like I just said, we're catching those Randall fish in September, October-ish. And those fish where we have these, I'm gonna call it baby blue, 7.5 inches or less, are quite abundant in our catch, and that is due to the fact that those smallmouth bass have spawned, and that baby blue color is a lot of those age 0 individuals being represented in our sample. With that being said, we do have larger fish in that area, and consistently. That blue, that dark blue, and the orange are consistently present in our samples. Moving on and looking at Lewis and Clark Lake, that is on the right. Again, year is on the x-axis, number of fish per hour is on the y-axis. And the main thing I would like to point out here is these fish are slightly bigger when looking at this figure, just due to the fact that those young of the year are not present in those samples because they have not spawned, because we usually shock in the spring around May. And so the vast majority of those fish, it looks like they're 7 to 11 inches. Now looking at the growth between these, they're quite similar. However, Lewis and Clark growth is a little faster. And you can see on the x-axis of both of them is age, and on the y-axis in both of these reaches is in length in inches. And with that, I guess we can start the questions.
All right, sounds good. So go ahead, if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we'll be able to kind of just
Jason.
share around the room.
Yeah, please.
Let's go. First off, thanks everybody. That went really smoothly. So thanks everybody for staying muted, dropping your questions in the chat. Really want to say thank you and appreciate that. So yeah, now is that question and answer portion of the day. So I'm just kind of going to take these in the order that I have received them. So I got one via text, and then we have a few here in the chat. So I'll do the text question first. Jason, I don't know if this would be a question for you, but update on smallmouth bass in Lake Francis case.
Yeah, let me pull up a couple slides here. Just so I get things right here. Wonder if I should share this again.
Yeah, go ahead and share it. Yeah.
Thinking about it. No.
And again, really appreciate you guys being patient, working with us. I've been super happy with how this has gone, so thank you.
There we go.
All right, we can see your screen, Jason.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I did put a couple of slides together on smallmouth bass here. I'll share it with you real briefly. Here it is, little box here. So this is, there we go. This is the years on the x-axis, 2013 through 2024, and the number per hour of electrofishing of our smallmouth bass on Lake Francis case. And these are sampled at several different locations throughout the length of the reservoir. And these are broken down by sizes, with this light blue being less than 7 inches. The tan or orange or whatever color that is, 7 to 11 inches. The red being the 11 to 14 inch fish, and the dark blue being those over 14 inches. As you can see, over the years, smallmouth bass have been pretty consistent on Lake Francis case as far as their numbers and sizes. We might, a few years ago, it seemed like we had a few more of those 11 to 14 inch bass. But we still see a pretty good jag of bass in those larger sizes, even in our 2024 sample. And keep in mind that some of these lows, some of this variability might not be as low as it seems. It just depends on the year and when we're sampling those bass. We sample them in June, and like I said, from one end of the reservoir to the other. And so they're pretty consistent and they're pretty healthy bass. That relative weight value that Amy and I keep talking about, that we like to see above 80. Smallmouth bass on Francis Case are typically well over 100 and a lot of times over 110. I think, if I remember right, the relative weights were averaging 113 in 2024. So I mean, these fish are healthy. They're eating well. And this is, I knew Nick would like that. Picture of our own Nick Harrington with a bass. This is the length frequency of the smallmouth bass. The length is in centimeters along the x-axis, and the number of bass per length group on the y-axis. You can see that we have a lot of different age groups represented here, all the way out to almost 20 inches. So good representation of sizes of fish. The bass are doing pretty well in Case. They're healthy. Their production is good. Their growth is good. Their overall condition has been excellent. Really, they don't change much year to year. We see this consistently over time. So, I hope that answers your question.
No, thanks, Jason. You definitely answered mine, and I didn't even have one in there. So the next two questions, I'm going to kick over to John Lott. John is our aquatic section chief, so he covers all of fishing across the state of South Dakota. John is going to be joining us remotely. So with that question, I have Bob. Does the use of LiveScope concern GFP for harvesting large fish? Is GFP considering regulation on use of LiveScope? And it looks like Bob is looking for permission to buy a LiveScope as the second part of that question. So hope I got that there for you, Bob. John, go ahead and take that one away.
Good evening, everybody, and I thank you for the time on the agenda this evening. The LiveScope, certainly big topic right now. I should start with, is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yep, we got you, John.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure on that, but certainly a big topic right now. And anytime we have a big change in technology, whether the size of boats we have, the sonars we have, new technology, there is always that new concern over things. And I don't believe you're going to see a ban on LiveScope. I think what you're going to see is that the fisheries managers across the country are going to still do what they have been doing for years. They're going to be looking at the fish populations, surveys that they do, the angler use and harvest surveys. They'll look at population status, see how that is doing. And I think the whole issue with LiveScope may be very species specific. I know here in the question, there's a specific component about using it for harvesting larger fish. It seems like on Hawaii this past fall, that certainly was something that occurred. It's becoming a technique that anglers are able to learn and use, and it's a good thing to have anglers out there enjoying the resource in the fall. End of the day, the question comes back to individual anglers and them doing what they can to be responsibly fishing with regards to the depth they're fishing, how they're fishing, and chances if a fish is able to survive. And that it is something we're able to do a lot better now for being able to target deep fish like this. So I went a little bit in a circle there, but I don't think you're going to see us banning LiveScope. I think what you'll see is whatever impact it has on hourly catch rates, on harvest of fish, that would be a consideration for how regulations are set for harvest of fish in the system.
Thanks, John and Bob. Hopefully that helps you, shop well moving into this coming year. That takes us into the second question. We'll leave it with John. This is from Jeff. Is there consideration to remove the walleye spearfishing in the future? Go ahead, John.
This is always an interesting topic. There are people I know who absolutely hate spearing for walleyes. Other people see it as their main thing they like to do out there when they're out enjoying the resource. And over time, we have consciously moved to increase opportunity for spearing a game fish. And a big standard for us in our management philosophy is to not restrict opportunity if there is not overharvest occurring. As we've opened up a game fish spearing to new locations, we haven't seen it where there's that overharvest occurring that would mean we would begin to need to restrict spearing a game fish. In the places where you do have the clarity and the opportunity to do it, it seems like it's an additional opportunity for people. I don't see us removing it anywhere unless there was a safety issue or some type of a user conflict where we'd have to begin working with parties on it to see what the resolution would be.
Sounds good. Thank you, John. We're gonna come back into the room here now. Chris, I'll probably point this one to you. Feel free to delegate as you wish. This question is from Tom. How confident are you in the accuracy and correlation comparison to other years of your Lake Francis case fishing use numbers? Were as many hours spent creeling, time of year? I have fished Lake Francis case every year for 25 years. 2024 was, in my estimation, the busiest year.
Tom, that's a good question. So just so everyone knows, we did change our Creel survey methodology in 2021. We did this to increase efficiency and also get a better estimate. In the past, we would have Creel clerks at a specified route, and they would spend so much time at each boat ramp, count the boats coming and going. And then we used some computer extrapolation to get our total pressure for that area for that month, et cetera. So now we use some car counters, and we also use some trail cameras to verify what we're getting from the car counters. And so really now we should be getting a more accurate number on pressure. I would say that the data that we have from 2024 is definitely comparable to what we had for 22 and 23 and 21 also, right, Jason? Mm-hmm. And so at least for the short term, I'm very confident in saying that those numbers are comparable. And when we've looked at the numbers and compared them to the old ones, everything seemed to make sense and was, similar ranges in data. So I would say it's probably pretty comparable to even the what I would call the historical data. As far as the amount of surveying effort that we did, we maintained a similar level of interviewing as we had in the past before. Well, actually, it was a slight decrease, but it was based on a power analysis that told it, that kind of dictated, how much effort would we need, how many interviews would we need to be within 90% of the true mean. And so, we have had consistent effort interviewing anglers throughout the reservoir since that change also in 2021. I hope that answers your question, Tom, gives you some confidence in what we're looking at here.
And Tom, I just want to make note too that, knowing you and knowing where you're at on the reservoir down there, our estimate is just the fishing use. And a lot of those ramps down in that part of the reservoir are very busy with recreational use. And our methods kind of tease that out of the data. So we don't count those boats in our estimate. We're only counting the angling use. And so it's important to note that when you're, and I don't know if you're basing this on the crowded boat ramps or not, but some of those boat ramps are crowded, but it's a lot of recreational use in that part of the reservoir. So if not everybody's out there angling.
So I apologize, I'm gonna go a little bit out of order here. Bob had a follow-up and it pertains to these last two questions. So are you in your Creel surveys making notes on which boats are using LiveScope versus not using and the size of fish? So I figured we could just blend that in. A good MC tries to make this flow good. I hope to be that one day.
So that is a great question. Jason, I can answer it, or yeah, go. You have the numbers in front of you.
I don't.
Okay, well, I'll answer it. So for the last 2 years, we did ask anglers if they were using live scopes during the interviews. And so each year, we average around 800 to 1,000 interviews, which is a really good sample when you look at it statistically. And it was about 18-20% of the anglers were using live scope.
21.
21. But then the interesting thing is there wasn't a statistical difference between their catch rates or the size of the fish that they were bringing in. And actually, when you look at the exact numbers, non-live scope users had slightly higher catch rates, not a meaningful difference, just a slightly higher. And then they also caught a slightly higher percentage of them caught a limit versus the live scope users. So really, we haven't seen it. And you also have to remember, we're dealing with averages. You know, the average angler using live scope versus the average angler not using live scope. I'm sure that there may be some individuals that it may really increase their fishing success, but there's on an average or, across the population, it hasn't made a difference that we have detected yet.
Alrighty, thanks, guys. We're gonna go back to the original list. This will probably be for Amy. This question seems for you. This is from guest, so good identity concealing. Why is there such a huge drop off in walleye from age 2 and future years? This doesn't match other South Dakota reservoirs, and that is geared at Lewis and Clark.
Do you wanna take this one, Chris?
Well, I'm not sure. Could you bring up the age frequency? I think that might be what he's referring to.
Yep, that's when this came in, during the age frequency. Yep.
Okay.
And typically in an age frequency, you'll see more fish at younger ages. It's just the way nature is. When fish lay their eggs and they hatch, they start out with a huge number. And each year as they get older, you have fewer and fewer fish in that year class. So it's natural that you'd have fewer and fewer fish as time goes on.
I'm not sharing it mine yet.
Okay.
You can add.
No, I'm asking.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're just looking at the drop off, so a number of things can be influencing that too. So that age 2. Well, yeah, so maybe you were,
That might have been in relation to the Sauger as well.
okay.
I'm sorry, you did say walleye. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, the age 2 is gonna be the most abundant year class, because that's the first age that is effectively sampled with those gill nets. And then over time, you have mortality and fishing harvest that will decrease the year class size as they get older. And yeah, there is a pretty good decrease after age 3. Lewis and Clark isn't as consistent of a walleye factory as Francis Case is. And so we could be looking at a couple stronger years at the 2 or 3, and then maybe age 4 a weaker year class down there. One thing with Lewis and Clark, it does have faster growth than the other reservoirs, so they're also, I guess, exposed to angling pressure at an earlier age, and you would also expect them not to live as long since they're growing faster. So you might see a little bit of that that decline limb might be a little steeper due to some of those characteristics.
All right,
I hope that answered the question there.
thanks, guys. Yep, I think so. Same individual. This one now gonna be geared toward Lake Francis Case. 3 years ago, Lake Francis Case had huge balls of shiners in late fall that have been decreasing. This year, the walleye numbers have dropped huge in the lower part of the lake. Any reason why? As a result, the bait fish are only seen in the upper reaches of the lake and in kind the walleye. So,
You want, I mean,
You can.
okay, yeah, yeah, so typically, we do see more gizzard shad the farther up the reservoir we get. That's not uncommon, but we do see shad pretty much the entire length of the reservoir. And that goes for walleyes also. There seems to be, at least in our net catches, walleyes throughout the entire length of the reservoir. And I gotta remember back to our 2024 sample, I believe some of the higher numbers of walleye we saw in our nets were in like the middle section of the reservoir. And so I'm not sure, if you were seeing balls of shiners or balls of gizzard shad, but in 2024, we did have a pretty good year class of gizzard shad, and there was a lot of shad in the lake, and the fish were keying in on them. As far as the lower end, I don't know if Chris wants to add anything.
Yeah, so we had some questions about this, and this fall we looked at our, not just the numbers, but the distribution of the walleyes and the shad throughout the lake. And it was kind of interesting. We caught walleyes in our gill nets all the way from Pickstown up to Fort Thompson, and even more surprisingly, we caught fish in 6 feet of water and all the way out to 85 feet, whatever our deepest net was. And so the walleyes were really spread out this year. Another thing that we looked at, but like Jason said, the highest catches were kind of focused in the middle of the reservoir. We also looked at the gizzard shad catches that we had, and the gizzard shad catches were the highest in the middle of the reservoir, kind of with the walleyes. So like what you said, it makes sense, where you have food, you're probably going to find the walleyes. But we did see gizzard shad in the lower end of the lake too, just not as many as we did in the middle part of the reservoir. So hopefully, and I guess I also have to say too on that, that was just a snapshot. That's what we found in our gill nets in September. If you were out there during different parts of the years, there could be, a different in distribution of the walleyes and the shad.
Yeah, they definitely move throughout the reservoir. Some fish are homebodies and stay put. Some fish travel quite a bit up throughout the lakes, and so we've seen that over time with some of our tagging efforts we did years ago. So yeah, like Chris said, different times of the year there could be a different distribution than what we saw in September.
thanks, guys. And again, thanks everybody for dropping your questions in the chat. This is going super smoothly, so I appreciate you guys helping us here. We're gonna keep it rolling. I have got Chad here. And Amy, this will probably be you. I noticed inexperienced, and on your graph in Lewis and Clark Lake, the yellow perch population as well as fish size has increased noticeably. What would you attribute that to? And is it sustainable or a flash in the pan?
Okay, I'll actually take that one if you don't mind.
Go get them.
So,
Pass them off as you wish. Bad MC, you gotta remember this.
So, yeah, we actually looked at that a little bit. We are seeing an increase in perch numbers on Lewis and Clark Lake. Some of the thoughts that we've had, and I think, if I remember right, I don't have this information in front of me, but the last 3 years, it looks like we've produced a year class of perch, and they're moving through the length frequencies, and we're seeing them stick around in the population and grow. So some of the things that could be influencing that, and this is just speculation, but with the presence of zebra mussels, we have started seeing more vegetation in areas of Lewis and Clark Lake, and yellow perch really do well in lakes that have some vegetation. That they use the vegetation to spawn on in the spring, and their eggs actually kind of hang on that vegetation, stay up off the bottom. And then also the young H0 perch will use that vegetation for cover, protection. And so it may be related to the presence of zebra mussels and then the subsequent increase in vegetation in Lewis and Clark Lake. So as to, is it sustainable or a flash in the pan? Time will really be the judge on that. If I had to guess, I think it might be a more frequent occurrence down there than it has been in the past. But, really right now we're at the early end of this, and it's just a hunch. So, but great question though.
Thanks, Chris. We're gonna go back now to someone I know is gonna take this one, John Mott. This question is gonna be from you. It comes from Raleigh. Raleigh is a 26-year non-resident fisherman who always brought a family license, which allowed his wife and kids to fish, but they couldn't keep any fish without purchasing their own license. Raleigh has now been in South Dakota for 4 years. Welcome to the state, Raleigh. And the law changed to where a non-resident 18 and under can fish and keep a limit without purchasing a license. Why was that changed? I get it that youth are our future in sport fishing, but an 18-year-old, I could handle 12 and under free, 12 to 16 a license, and above that, a full license. Your thoughts? So John, you want to take that?
Certainly. It's interesting, this question, when it comes up and they begin with the family license, I almost always hear, why is there no longer a family license? That's the big one I hear. This all has to do with some changes that were made about the time that we started our new licensing system, where if you're less than 18 years of age, there is no license requirement. It's nice and simple. Those individuals are entitled to their own daily limit. At that same time, the family license then for non-residents went away, with the idea each individual who was an adult should be able to buy their own license and then be entitled to a limit. So it's really just a change in the philosophy, if you will, for how we pursued the licensing structure. One thing we had a lot of was that the family license was not always being used, if you would, for a family, but a couple. And by splitting that up into each individual having a license, it was believed to be more appropriate for the opportunity that was being received in association with the license fee. But 18 is pretty much a standard for the resident and non-resident anglers in terms of at that age and above, a license is required, and our belief is that below that age, everyone should be able to fish.
Thank you, John. We're now gonna come here in the town of Chamberlain. Eric Storm's here. Have you guys done a study on closing the area between the railroad and interstate on Francis Case and Chamberlain? If so, has it helped the fishing population? But if there hasn't been a study, could we remove the off limits?
That's a good question, Eric. So just to start off, we'll give a little bit of history on that closure. That rule has been in place for quite a few years before my time here. And so it was really put in place due to public demand. Anglers saw that during the wintertime, fish were being caught from deep water, and they were reporting that there was fairly high mortality on those fish that were being released. And due to the public demand, that rule was put in place. In the past, I want to say it was 2019, 2018. We did look at getting rid of that rule. It is a small portion of the reservoir and likely doesn't have a biological impact on the fish. in the big scheme of things, compared to an average day in May or June, the release mortality coming from the dredge hole is gonna be just a small drop in the bucket. But so we were looking at getting rid of that regulation, or we were evaluating it. And so we put out a public opinion survey, and that rule was still overwhelmingly supported by the public, and so we did not pursue getting rid of it. Since then, I think you are probably aware, the commission did get rid of the releasing or keeping the first 4 fish through the ice down on the lower end of Fort Randall. That was another similar rule that was put in place due to public demand. And we haven't seen much for angler concern about that rule going away. And so the dredge hole closure could be an option to be looked at again. But we would really have to evaluate the public support or opposition to that rule to make that change, because that was put in place for social reasons. And
So Chris, with that answer, I'm gonna skip questions a little bit. This one is gonna be directed to Jason, Chris, and Mark. I am free from this question. Does the stress of managing our great South Dakota fishing have a direct effect on the shortness of the hair on our fisheries biologists? You do a great job. Thanks for your commitment.
Yeah, I'm a little offended, guy.
There's always,
I sit on this side of the room.
You see this?
there's always someone in the group.
So with that, notice I took my hat off for this question. So with that, thank you, Bob. Question of the night. Now we're gonna go to the public enemy number 1 of smallmouth bass, Dylan Gravenhoff. Why the relatively low abundance of smallmouth bass, 14 to 15 inches in case, really fast growth and excellent condition, but not much for bigger bass? Is there high angler harvest of bass on case?
Thanks for that question, Dylan. So I just looked into that with our Creel survey information that we got today, and this was a pretty cursory look at smallmouth bass harvest on Francis Case. But I didn't break it down by strata, weekend, weekday, and by month. It was just total angler hours spent, and then the average catch rate, or average harvest rate of smallmouth bass, and it was actually pretty low. I think the estimated harvest on bass was in between 2,000 and 3,000 for Francis Case.
In 2024.
In 2024. And then when you looked at the catch rate, and this is just over the entire period, and with an average from all the interviews, it looked like 1 out of 10 bass that were caught, 1 was harvested. So that's just a little information. I wouldn't say that is high harvest. Now one thing that we have to realize is a large percentage of these interviews came from walleye anglers, and so they weren't necessarily targeting bass. Just that's the nature of this fishery. Most of the fishermen are targeting walleyes. And another thing too is we may have had lower catch rates of bass too, because they did have high WRs, and they probably were experiencing the same food abundance that the walleyes were. Another thing is our abundance of smallmouth bass is indexed through electrofishing, and generally it samples the smaller fish more effectively than the larger fish. So that might be some of what you're seeing on that graph.
So I'm gonna keep it with the smallmouth trend. This is a text question I have from Tim. Thoughts on smallmouth slot limits? Would that have an impact on population? Just kind of mirrors along with Dylan's question, so I wanted to slide that in there.
Sure. So, kind of the idea with some of those slot limits, or it kind of depends on what you're talking about for a slot limit. When I hear slot limit, I think of a protected slot limit, where you are trying to increase harvest on fish below a certain size, and then you protect the remainder of the fish in that protected zone so they can grow up and, you know, get to a larger size. And so the goal of that is to reduce competition, to increase growth of those fish during that protected size, and then end up with more fish above your slot. Being a gizzard shad lake, we probably are very rarely food limited. And so reducing competition on bass may have little effect, especially when we're talking about a low harvest without the protected slot. We also did have a case study of having a protected slot on Lake Sharp for a number of years, and just going off memory, I think it was 12 to 16 or 12 to 18 protected, and then it was moved to 14 to 18. And so it was somewhere in there, and just looking at the harvest, and we went through that data, and that regulation was not having an impact on the smallmouth bass population, so we did not continue that. Now that being said, there may be some opportunity for some other regulations on smallmouth bass in the state, but right now, at least for Francis' case, and Lewis and Clark work, we don't think it's appropriate at this time.
Thanks, Chris. We're gonna go back kind of to a topic. This is from guest again. The answers that you gave on bait fish on Francis' case and the associated catch based on the same GFP presentation on Sharp and Oahe, lower and upper doesn't match, i.e. the number of boats on Sharp increased by a sizable percentage as the catch on Lake Francis case was down. Can you explain further? So for a little bit of background for where this question is coming from, our Pier Fishery staff held a meeting about a month ago, Pier and Mulbridge. And guests, please chat me if I'm wrong, jump in if I'm too terribly wrong here. One of the attributes that we attributed to some of the lower end pressure on that West Bend Iron Nation area of Sharp came from, you know, decreasing catch rates on Francis case. So I believe, if I am understanding correctly, that might be where that question is coming from. So my apologies if I am not conveying this super well, but based on what I have, do you guys have an answer for that one?
Not really. I guess I'm not exactly sure what he's looking for here.
And guests, feel free to unmute yourself and
Yeah,
if you can explain
I
yourself.
think this is the question if you're not.
And kind of help us out here. That'd probably help us out here. We have a D+ MC.
And I'm not sure, with the increased fishing use they saw on Lake Sharp on the lower end, if that actually was a result of the lower catch rates on case or not, I don't know. If we can fully attribute that to that, or if there's other reasons that may have caused that increase. But as far as the bait fish, and the associated catch.
I guess, would you be able to unmute yourself and kind of help us out through this one if we still got you? Okay, maybe what we'll do is we'll just kind of keep it rolling, and then if we get a little bit more, we can come back to this one. Just make sure we get this one well. I'm gonna go back to John Lott here. My apologies, I kind of lost myself. This question is from Chris N. Apologies if this question is redundant. I joined late. Can you please comment on zebra mussels? What's the future impact look like, positive or negative or other?
Thanks, Nick. I think the impact of zebra mussels will be different for every water. One thing we have typically seen is that the biggest impact of zebra mussels is going to be on our surface water users, people who pump water, municipalities, irrigators, lakeshore property owners. There's not a lot of information out there to show that there have been impacts to fisheries. I think what will be interesting is a little bit of the information I heard this evening from Jason regarding maybe changes in fish distribution and how anglers have to relate to fish then as a result of zebra mussels making the water more clear, there being increased vegetation growth, things like that. Specifically with Francis' case, one thing I'm interested to see, and I don't know if Jason, Amy, or Chris have really had any opportunity to look into it, but is how does that annual fall drawdown on Francis' case every fall, where the reservoir slowly refills over winter, how does that impact your zebra mussel distribution within the water column? But yeah, zebra mussels overall, we haven't seen a lot of specific impacts on fisheries. A lot of times the ecology in a lake may change for how the food pathways and nutrient pathways work, but it seems like the lakes are still providing fisheries.
Thank you, John. So I'm gonna go back here to the text, and we're gonna have a couple questions here geared towards the Delta area. Chris, those will probably be towards you. These are from Tim. So Tim, if I misstate, please jump on. But so we have got the down in the Delta area, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been spraying aquatic Roundup on vegetation and also been utilizing a chemical to on the same topic, treat zebra mussels that are going through the dam. Impacts that this Roundup treatment or this treatment to the dam for zebra mussels may have on the fish, but particularly the bass down in the Delta. Tim, if I misspoke, please correct me.
Okay, so I'll start off with that first one. The Roundup spraying, I'm assuming they're using an aquatic safe version of Roundup. And what they're doing is likely, without knowing exactly what you're talking about, is treating the vegetation on sandbars to provide for tern and plover nesting habitat. Those birds really like a bare sandbar with a wetted area. And so there's specific sandbars that are more important for those species of greater concern. And as long as they're not spraying that vegetation into the water at pretty high concentrations, it shouldn't affect the submerged vegetation. If there are Phragmites, being submerged and they're killing those, it may limit that type of habitat, but I don't see that causing a big problem for the bass down there. Their habitat is going to be the submerged vegetation that likely isn't even exposed to any kind of concentrated chemical. And as far as the Corps treating the water in their powerhouse, I think a lot of what they're doing is treating water within their cooling systems and their fire suppression systems. And so it's a smaller amount of water than what's coming through the dam. And that's generally going to be some kind of copper ion or copper formulation of some kind. And we're talking a very small amount that gets diluted very quickly. So right now there's no concerns on our end.
And a follow-up there, they are spot spraying the whole river is what Tim said. And he said it is not for bird habitat. That's the text I just got right now. Spot spraying the whole river, not for birds. So I think that might be one that I think, Tim, I'll give your contact information to Chris and we can get you guys visiting and I talked to Tim on the phone on my way down here. And there's a couple other topics, so I'm gonna make sure you guys all get in touch if that sounds good.
That sounds good. And yeah, and I can get in contact with some of the Corps of Engineer folks and get some more specifics on that project.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. So Tim, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Nick, to cut you off, just to share a little bit of my knowledge as well. The Corps is spraying islands aerially by helicopters, and then their goal is to actually reintroduce native plants like cattails and other plants as well. So that's kind of what's going on. I don't know the effect it's having on the fishery or anything, but that is what's happening. So spraying select islands each year aerially and burning it off and replanting native plants.
We are gonna give an assist to Taylor on that one. Thank you very much, Taylor. Taylor is our CO down in that neck of the woods, so he's a good help, so thank you, sir. All right, I'm gonna go back to the chat here. This is from John. Thanks for the presentation. The effect of water run through the system is quite influential. Have you guys tried to quantify the change in water clarity? Will that affect your surveys with respect to smallmouth bass? I see your surveys are quite varied from daytime, nighttime, and fall and spring. How does growth by age compare between the reservoirs?
I'll try to touch on this. Let's see here. So the surveys are quite varied, daytime, nighttime, fall, spring, and you're right, that is based on water clarity. Electrofishing surveys in clear water are less effective during the day than at night. And then also when you have dirtier water, then you can get away with electrofishing during the day. Another thing that we have to deal with is also navigation concerns down in the delta and some of the riverine portions. And so there is some difficulty sampling down there in night. The zebra mussels may clear up the water some, and that we'll have to keep track on that if that does start impacting our surveys. Right now, we don't have any monitoring program that is looking at water clarity. It's definitely on our radar. We have some data from before and after the zebra mussel introduction in Lewis and Clark Lake. But really what drives a lot of the water clarity that we can see is still wind. You know, when you get a windy day, it still muds up just like it used to, but maybe it might clear up a little sooner now than it has in the past. But yeah, it's definitely a consideration that we need to keep an eye on. And then I don't know if Amy or Jason, can you talk about the growth difference between the reservoirs?
Not off the top of my head without having that stuff in front of me, I don't remember.
Ditto.
So Amy, looking at that smallmouth bass stuff, we were hitting 14 inches at age 5.
5-ish, yeah.
Do you have the Francis down on Lewis and Clark Lake?
Lewis and Clark. I don't have the Francis K stuff in front of me. And
Oh, okay.
I don't remember it off the top of my head.
So we don't have that in front of us. I would, if I had to take a guess, I'd say Lewis and Clark is slightly faster than Francis Case or very similar.
If you wanted to give us some contact information, we could get that,
Yeah.
get back in touch with you and give you that information.
Yeah, and if you just wanna send that to me too in the chat, like direct message me and not send your, phone number to 50 other people, that's perfectly acceptable and understandable as well. So, we're gonna go here back to Raleigh. Two question here, a little bit different. Why no yellow perch or northern pike recruitment in Lake Francis Case? And then the follow-up is there any fish at all in Red Lake near Chamberlain? So Jason's nodding like he's got this one.
Well, yeah, great question. Yeah, in reality, we do have yellow perch production and recruitment in the reservoir. Just not at a high level like you would see in some other settings, but we consistently see H0 perch in some of our survey work that we do. I think a lot of those fish end up getting turned into walleye flesh fairly quickly. As that's one of the food items that the fish prey on in the reservoir, but we do see a few larger yellow perch here and there, but we don't ever see big numbers of them. As far as northern pike go, northern pike need flooded vegetation to rear their young in, and when we see a pike hatch, it's during our flood years when we have the backs of the bays all flooded and we got grass and trees and weeds and all kinds of stuff in the water. And once we see a pike hatch like that year class of pike that's produced will probably have to last, a good 8, 10, 12 years until we see high water again. And then we might get another pike hatch. And so while there's not a lot of pike in the reservoir, there are some, and typically when anglers catch one, it's a pretty good sized fish, but, the recruitment of those is so sporadic, just it's based on that water level and that flooding. As far as Red Lake near Chamberlain goes, yeah, we have stocked fish in there since the water came up, several years ago. We started stocking in
18, I believe.
2019.
19.
We've stocked yellow perch and walleyes both, several different times, several different years. And so there are yellow perch and walleye in Red Lake. It also has a pretty healthy population of common carp and a lot of fathead minnows and a few bullheads. But the bullhead numbers, I believe, have dropped a little bit since the walleyes got put in there. Walleyes typically feed on bullheads pretty readily. So yeah, so there are some fish in there, and this winter anglers have been catching some perch and some walleye. They don't expect to catch limits of fish by any means. It's pretty sporadic, but they are catching some fish.
Thank you, guys. Raleigh says great answers, so thank you. So thank you, Raleigh. Just for the folks that haven't really been watching the chat, we had Eric follow up to his question on the dredge hole here in Pier. Thanks for the answer, and if all possible, could we do another public opinion survey on whether to keep it or if we can discard the off limits in Chamberlain? Thank you for your time. Mark Ohm, Region 2 Supervisor here, said, Eric, thank you for the interest in this regulation. We do periodically look at all these rules and try to reduce unnecessary regulations. This one is due to be reviewed again soon. So thank you, guys. Just wanted to put a little bit of a bow on that one. So it looks like we're down here near the end. I see Mike here a couple times, and it says, BY Water draws their water out of Lewis and Clark. How did all those weeds get started anyways? BY, is that, Mike, if you could unmute, kind of help me out here. I'd take the assist.
I believe that's a rural water system.
That's what my guess is too.
Yeah,
Mike, there you go.
sorry to
Taylor's.
interrupt- sorry to interrupt you, Nick, but BY Water
Go.
District is the rural water for Bonhomme, Yankton County. And then looking down at Mike's lower question there, I'm guessing it's referencing Phragmites and the expansion of Phragmites throughout the Missouri River and into other impoundments. That would be my guess.
So Taylor's got multiple assists tonight, so thank you, Taylor. He is a very good resource for many of you on the call. So yep, Mike says yes, so thank you, guys.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean,
comment. Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
Sorry to keep interrupting you, Nick, but for Mike, I mean, as far as Phragmites started, maybe someone could help me out as well, but I believe it probably goes beyond fishing and into our waterfowl hunting there into the Delta. I'm guessing that's how the Phragmites started. It's long before my time, but I'm guessing a duck hunter brought it in on a boat possibly, which then introduced it to our area. Now we're still fighting it. As far as GF&P goes, on our aquatic side, each year we are spraying and cutting Phragmites in parks, mainly just to open up some access for local fishermen and the users of our parks. So that's kind of how we're trying our best to manage it, although sometimes it does seem like an uphill battle.
Thank you, Taylor. And for clarification, I'm the one that interrupts. It's impossible for someone to interrupt me. That's just the humane thing to do. So Following up to that, as we were talking bass, Dylan Gravenhoff said, very similar growth rates to sharp and awahi as we were discussing bass growth in Francis Case and Lewis and Clark.
And I'm guessing when we look at Francis Case, we're gonna see similar growth rates to that too, but, like I said, we can get that to him.
Yep, and I have one more here question on the docket so far. Tim, this is from our conversation earlier. Any update on catfish research projects or populations taking place in the lower Missouri River? And Tim, if I have more to add or if I got it wrong, let me know.
So Tim, there are currently no catfish research projects going on the lower Missouri River. One thing that we see with catfish down there, and Amy really showed some of that information in her talk, so maybe your question is answered already, but, or somewhat. But yeah, catfish are very consistent in the lower section of the Missouri River in South Dakota. The only time we don't see them in relatively high abundances is during high water years, and that's probably mostly due to our gear limitations. The gillnets can only fish so efficiently when there's extra water running through them. They fill up with weeds and other stuff, and they might get pushed down to the bottom. But we see consistent recruitment to our catfish population, and every 5 years we do age the catfish to monitor growth, and Lewis and Clark has the fastest growth out of the 4 Missouri River reservoirs in South Dakota. Another thing too is, when you're looking at that data that Amy showed, our gillnet mesh size, the biggest mesh size is only 2.5 inches. And so we're really not sampling the big catfish that are down there. We did some trout lining work down there when we were looking for some sturgeon, and we came across lots of very large, very nice looking catfish, up over 15 pounds easily, and quite a few of them. So there's a lot of good quality catfish down there in Lewis and Clark Lake.
Well, and when we say Lewis and Clark Lake, we also mean the Delta and the Riverine Reach as well.
Yes.
All across the board, it was very, very good sizes.
So thank you guys. So we are through my list of questions. With that, first off, thanks everybody. We still got 44 folks on the call, so appreciate y'all sticking with us. Hope you found this helpful. And Alex Gebhardt, Amy, I believe this is probably for you. Has there been any talk at reintroducing blue catfish? Amy, I assume this is for you.
There has. Gavin's Point is trying and has not been successful enough to be able to stock them in the reservoir at this point. But there is efforts.
Thanks, Amy, and if you need some follow-up contact information on
I'll
how to
just
get
go home.
in touch with Alex. So with that, again, thank you guys very much for this. Has been super organized, super respectful. I hope you found it useful. With that, feedback, other questions, I mean, any feedback, it's gonna all fall on me, and I got plenty of hair still. So, I mean, feel free to let us know what worked, what didn't, and I appreciate everybody helping us out tonight.
I think I'm winning the contest.
What?
Yeah, you have to have short hair.
If you're winning, what am I doing?
Well, you're not in the contest.
And with
I
that,
feel in the contest.
things are getting a little out of control here. So does anybody have anything? Please feel free to unmute, tune in. Just really anything you got, we want to hear it. Travis March, good work, everyone. Great information. Thank you, Travis. We dropped 10 people. They must not like my jokes. So with that, if there is not anything else, again, thank you to our staff here putting us on. Thank you everybody that took the time to get on here. It's gonna be on our YouTube page, and this is really good information to share. I think we covered a lot of fish data information, lots of questions, and again, hope you all found it useful. And with that, I think we're all excited for it to be more -2 degrees out here. So have a good night, and we're looking forward to the coming year. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.